Okay, now we're going to visit some of the bones of the face and the jaw, and we've used our color-coded skull here again. The mandible, which is the jaw portion, has been removed. We can start to appreciate some of the bones of the face and the jaw. The one that stands out at first is our nasal bones. So we have a pair of those right here, pictured in white. We have our zygomatic bone here. This is in yellow, and I'll turn so that we can see. So this basically forms a big portion of our cheekbone. Now we have a couple landmarks that we want to be able to identify, and they're real easy because they actually, if you think of this almost as a almost like a tree shape where we've got three processes for the most part. This we consider our zygomatic arch right here. This we would consider our temporal process. And why is it called the temporal process? Well, because it's attaching here with our temporal bone that we've already identified before. We then also have a frontal process. So the frontal process obviously going up towards the frontal bone, which we've identified already as well. And then we've got this orbital margin and then the orbital surface of the zygomatic bone. Okay, so that's our zygomatic bone. We then also have the large bone in the really constituting the front of our face is our maxilla. So our maxilla here is pictured in purple, if you can appreciate that. So we can see it butting up against our nasal bones here. So it's kind of making up the lateral aspect of our nose. It then is also going to house the upper portion of our teeth here. Okay, so some landmarks that we want to make sure that we are familiar with. There's a process called the alveolar process. That's connecting right in here with from midline, our second tooth. So this is this little ridge right in here off the maxilla. We also have the orbital surface. If you notice, there's a big portion of the maxilla that actually serves kind of like, let me turn this a little bit, kind of like the floor, if you will. Here it is on this side, the floor of the orbit, and we'll talk a little bit more specifically about the orbit as well. We also have the infraorbital notch, or the infraorbital foramen. So this is the little hole that you see just right below the eye socket there, or the orbit. Some other areas that I'd like you to be able to identify is the frontal process. So this is just the projection up towards the frontal bone. We've already talked about this being kind of the lateral aspect of your nose, and the most medial aspect of your of the orbit or your eye socket. We also have a projection of the maxilla going back. Think of this as the base of your nose, if you will, but it also becomes then the roof of your mouth, and we refer to that as the palatine, and we'll see this here. So that's your palatine plate, and we can see our palatine plate from an inferior view there as well. So these alveolar processes are the ones that are going to connect with the teeth. And the only other aspect of the maxilla that I'd like you to be familiar with is the incisive foramen, which is going to be kind of right in the middle. If we turn this from a posterior view, almost where you'd rest your tongue on the roof of your mouth, that's where you could find the incisive foramen, or also called the incisive canal. So some other bones, if we start taking apart the face here, facial bones, we can remove zygomatic bones, and we can then remove maxilla bones, and we just lost the vomer. So the vomer here, it doesn't want to stay in. The vomer is this process here. I'm just going to hold it there so it, from a lateral view, it would look like this. Not showing up good against my orange shirt, but it's kind of a projection towards the almost towards the base of the or the most inferior aspect of the nose. Okay, and then this kind of odd-shaped bone here in yellow is called our ethmoid bone, and this is where we saw the crista galli. So I take this out, and the cribriform plate that we saw when we opened up the cranium and looked from a superior to inferior view. So that there is your ethmoid bone. You can see it has connection with the sphenoid bone and also with the frontal bone as well. Another bone that we failed to mention was when we turn the maxilla. So here's the anterior aspect of the maxilla, and then we turn this around and we see this pink U-shaped bone is called our palatine bone. Alright, so you can see another view of that as well. So that, for the most part, is the items that I'd like you to learn for the bones of the face, and we'll get a mandible over here, and we'll go over the pieces of the mandible as well.